And we are live. Good evening and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. We have got our virtual studio audience ready and waiting to join me in the exciting world of Maseches Bechorot, chapters 3 and 4, Perek Gimel and Perek Daled. So why wait, guys? Let's get ourselves underway right now. Let's see how we go. As always, I will do my very, very best to make it somewhat understandable. So here we go. Chapter 3. So fundamentally, if a Jew buys an animal from a non-Jew and acquires full possession, so the non-Jew will not have any ownership. So if that's the case, if the non-Jew has no ownership over the animal and the Jewish person has full ownership over the animal, then they are going to be obligated in the mitzvah of giving over the Bechor, giving over the firstborn animal of that mother. But what if you don't know if the animal has given birth before the sale or not? Let's have a look as we dive into the world of chapter 3, Mishnah Aleph. Halokeach behema min hanochri, a person who purchases an animal from a non-Jew. Ve'ein yadua im bikra vim lo bikra, and it is not known if this mother animal has given birth before or not. So Rabbi Shmuel says it's going to depend on how old the animal is. Eiz bas shnasa vadai la kohen. If you are purchasing a goat and it is not yet a year old, then for sure, if it gives birth, it won't have given birth before. So this must be its first child, in which case, vadai la kohen, it's for sure going to be given to the kohen. Mikan ve'elach safek. But if you are buying this goat and it is a year old or older, then you can't be sure that it hasn't previously given birth, in which case it's a doubt. And if it's a doubt, then you are not going to be giving the animal, the offspring, to a kohen. Says the Mishnah, Rachel, what if you are buying a female sheep, a ewe? It's interesting. Why isn't it an ewe? It's spelt with an E, but it is a ewe. A ewe. So, what if you are buying a ewe? So then, what's going to be the halacha over there? So the Mishnah says, Bas shtayim. If it is up to 2 years old, vadai la kohen, then of course it is going to be given to a kohen, because it can't have given birth beforehand. Mikam ve'elach safek. If it is older than 2 years old, then it is a safek. And since it is a safek, it won't be given to kohen. It can be eaten, but there are some stringencies. So that would be the halacha, says Rabbi Yishmael. Para v'chamor. If you are buying a female cow or a female donkey, then benos shalosh vadai la kohen. As long as it is within its first 3 years, it's for sure going to be given to the kohen. Mikan va'elech safek. From then on, it is a doubt. Amalo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is going to come and comment over here. Rabbi Akiva fundamentally agrees, like Rabbi Shmuel, regarding the ages of an animal being able to give birth, but he disagrees because sometimes an animal can have a miscarriage. And if an animal has a miscarriage, then it might be that the next offspring is invalid for giving as a Bechor. And because you cannot be certain that an animal hasn't had a miscarriage within those first year, 2 years, 3 years, so let's see what Rabbi Akiva says. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, ilu bavalad bilvad behema nifteres hayach idvarecha. Rabbi Akiva says, if it was only on account of having a full-fledged offspring, then I might agree with you. The words would be as you say. However, he says, Ela amru siman havlad behema daka tinuf. But he says that there is an indication. If a small animal has some kind of blood discoloration, some kind of discharge, which would indicate that it has been possibly pregnant, then you're going to have a problem because it would indicate that there might have been a pregnancy before that threshold of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So according to Rabbi Akiva, therefore, I don't know if this means that you have to be seeing possible signs of a previous pregnancy, or whether it means that we just completely discount all of these animals because of the possibility. I'm not entirely certain, but what he's saying is that in a small animal, if you find this discoloration in the discharge, then it indicates that it may have been pregnant, and that would then exempt any future offspring. Uvagasa shilya, with a larger animal, there could be a placenta which could indicate that it had been previously pregnant. Uva isha, and with a woman, shafir of a shilya. If a woman has ever had any kind of miscarriage and therefore produced a shafir, which is basically the fetal sac, vashilya, which is the placenta, or it says there on the screen, the afterbirth. So since these things could have come on account of a miscarriage, and these things could present in animals even before these thresholds, it would seem then, according to Rabbi Akiva, it's going to be exempt even in these earlier stages. So he would disagree fundamentally, therefore, with Rabbi Ishmael. Says the Mishnah, Zehaklal, this is our general rule. Kol shiadua shebikra, if you know that the animal has given birth before, ein kan lakohen klum, nothing goes to the kohen. Kol shalom bikra, if the animal has not given birth before, harei ze kohen, then the offspring is going to go to the kohen. Im safek, if you are in any doubt whatsoever, ye achel b'mumor lebalim, it may be eaten in a blemished state by the owners. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Behema gasa sheshafa chararas dam. If you have a large animal that passes a big clot of blood, so he would say, Harei zoti kaveh, you should even bury this, the niftara min Bechorot, and that would then exempt any future offspring. So this congealed blood, this clot of blood, he is concerned, like Rabbi Akiva is, that perhaps it's a presentation of a previous pregnancy, and therefore you wouldn't give any of the further offspring as a Bechorot. So an interesting halacha there from Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and it's interesting actually because I have a little note in my Mishnah here, which either will be understood or will go way over our heads. But previously we saw in Maseches Chulin, chapter 4, we saw that it is permitted to give placenta of a firstborn offspring to dogs, since it has no kedusha, it has no sanctity. So we would then think that we should be able to give this clot and feed that to dogs if we felt the inclination to do so. And actually, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is giving us a halacha over here that there's a very rare halacha that you have to bury it if it was presenting in this way. So an interesting parenthetical point, which either we have chapped or will have gone over our heads, but it was in my notes. So
is that because it's seen as the life source?
Yes, it will have been seen according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov as a source of life, as if it was a real.
No, I'm not saying that. It's that for the same reason that we bury the blood when we shecht.
I see.
The blood is seen as the life force within the animal.
Hugely possible what you are saying.
Okay.
Hugely possible. Any more questions? Ask my notes. So Mishnah base. So here's an interesting one as well. Is a nursing animal proof that it was definitely the mother of that animal? So what if you find multiple mothers, some of which had given birth previously and some of which had not, but they were all nursing calves or whatever the offspring is. So let's have a look at that permutation. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, if you if you purchase a nursing animal from a non-Jew, you should not be concerned that it's nursing the offspring of another animal. We can assume that I keep wanting to say child, but the young animal is clearly nursing from its mother, and therefore it will have previously given birth. So if it then gets pregnant and gives birth again, that animal will not be considered the Bechor, and it won't have to therefore be given to a Kohen. Says the Mishnah, Nichnas letoch edro. If we go into the pen, v'ra'a es hamavkiros menikos, ve'es she'inon mavkiros menikos, and we see that there are some animals here that have given birth that are nursing, and we also see some animals that have never given birth before, but they're also nursing. So the Mishnah says, Eino choshesh shema b'no shel zeh, bat lo etzel zo, or shema b'no shel zo, bat lo etzel zo. So we do not need to be concerned, says the Mishnah, that the animal of one animal has come to the other mother, or that or vice versa. And rather, I think what we're saying is all these animals will be considered to have given birth beforehand. So that is Mishnah base. Mishnah Gimel, Rabbi Yossi ben Meshulam Omer. Rabbi Yossi ben Meshulam says, Hashochet es ha-bechor. If a person slaughters a bechor, which you would do so as a sacrifice, Osem makom bekofitz mikan umikan v'tolesh haseyar. Says the Mishnah, you have to. So let's say we've got this sheep. Okay, so that's what we're talking about over here. So Rabbi Yossi ben Meshulam here is bringing an example of a person who is slaughtering a firstborn sheep, right? And it is forbidden to shear the what's it called? The fleece, the wool. Thank you, the wool. Don't know why I can't remember that. It's the pressure of performing live in public. So you're not allowed to shear the wool off of a firstborn animal, but you need to slaughter it. And if you need to slaughter it, then you need to be able to clear an area so that you can see where you're cutting. So the Mishnah says, that what you would need to do then is clear some space. You clear some space with a kofitz, which I've got translated as a hatchet, which the screen translates as a cleaver. And what you're doing is you are trying to clear space on either side of the neck. You might end up plucking the wool out of the body of the sheep. But you need to get a clean swipe. And the truth is that you use a knife when you're doing the shechita, but the reason why the Mishnah talks about this kofitz, its large hatchet, is because you do need to find a good spot to be able to do the shechita. But the Mishnah says, uvilvad shelo yezezenu mimkomo. But we have to try and make sure not to move any of the wool, and not to detach any of the wool completely. You have to try and keep that wool attached to the body of the animal, because you're not supposed to be cutting the wool off an animal if it is a bechor. And says the Mishnah, finishing off, V'chein hatolesh es hasayar liros makom hamum. And likewise, you have to do this to be able to examine whether the animal has got a blemish or not. You have to be able to not sift through, but you have to be able to comb this wool out of the way to be able to examine and to see whether it can be slaughtered or not. And finally, goodness me, a short chapter, chapter 3, the final Mishnah of Perek Gimel. The Torah forbids a person to shear wool from a Bechor. That was what I said just a minute ago, whether it is unblemished or not. However, once you slaughter a korban, you can benefit from the wool, just like you can benefit from the hide of other animals. So let's have a look at a couple of situations. What if the wool falls off an animal before you slaughter? Is that going to be like you have cut the wool yourself, so it would be forbidden? Or is it going to be permitted, because it's going to be like wool that comes off after you've done the shechita? And situation number 2, What happens if the Bechor dies? So you have to bury it. But are you going to be allowed to derive any benefit or not? So we are going to see two opinions in the Mishnah between, we're going to see a machlokes, I should say, between Akavya ben Mehalalel and the Chachamim. But it's going to be presented in two different ways what they are arguing about. So hopefully this won't get too technical. Let's have a look. Sa'ar Bechor Ba'al Mum. You have got the hair of an animal, a firstborn animal, which is Ba'al Mum, which is blemished. Shenoshar, and it has fallen off. It is shed from the animal. V'nicho b'chalon, and you go and put it on the window ledge. V'achar kach shechato, and then you come along and you slaughter this animal. That's our situation. Are you allowed to have benefit or not? Akavya ben Mahalalel, Akavya ben Mahalalel matir. Akavya ben Mahalal says, yes, you are allowed to benefit from this wool, from this hair, from this fur. The Chachamim osrim, and the Chachamim say, you're not. And that is Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That is Rabbi Yehuda's interpretation of the machlokes. Rama Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Lo bazeh hetir akavya. This is not the situation that akavya was coming to permit. Ella bisar bechor balmum shanashar. Rather, he's talking about a situation where the firstborn animal, which is blemished, and the hair has fallen off, v'hinicho b'chalon, and you have taken that fur, that wool, and you've put it on the side, on the window ledge, v'achar kach meis, and then the animal goes and dies. Bazeh akavya ben Mahalalel matir. In that situation, Akavya ben Mahalalel says you're allowed to benefit from the wool. But the Chachamim are going to forbid it. And that is because they are afraid that you're going to take advantage of the situation and cut off more, bite off more than you can chew. That you're going to cut off more wool than you are actually allowed. And you're just going to take the mickey a bit. Says the Mishnah to finish off chapter 3, Hatsemer Hamaduvlal Babchor. If you have got wool which gets mixed up with other wool which is not attached to the skin, Es Shehu Nir'eh Minagiza. That which is visible, is that right? Yeah, that which appears to be part of the animal, of the wool that has been cut, is going to be permitted. And that which does not appear to be part of the wool that has been shorn from this sheep, asur, is going to be forbidden. So the yeah. Okay, so this is based on the premise that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda had said a stricter opinion that when you shecht it, yeah. So if you remember, we said at the beginning that you've got this wool that's fallen off and you've put it on the side and then you've shechted the animal. The Chachamim are still going to forbid it, and that was within the world of Rabbi Yehuda. And then this end part is also within the world of Rabbi Yehuda. So if you have this wool of the Bechorot that gets mixed up with other wool, so as long as it's clear that it is coming from the animal, then you can use it. But if it is no longer clear and it's become mixed up, then you have to be strict, like the Chachamim in the world of Rabbi Yehuda. And that appears to be, in case you needed to know, that appears to be what the halacha sides like in any event. In that case, Mazdov, ladies and gentlemen, on completing Perek Gimel. Comments or questions before we dive into Perek Dalet? Oh, it's such a saintly audience. Everything that I say is immediately clear. Okay. I love it when I get Philip's little grins there. It's all about the humour, hey? Perek Daled, ladies and gentlemen. Let's move on to chapter 4. We're in the world of no Beis Hamikdash. So at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, you would give the animal to a Kohen after 8 days, so it could be brought as a korban. But how long do you have to wait if there is no Beis Hamikdash? Ooh. Says the Mishnah, Ad kama Yisrael chayavim litapel babachor. For how long must the Israelite tend to this animal and look after this animal before giving it to the priest? So the Mishnah says, B'behema daka, with a small animal, ad shloshim yom. You have to take care of the animal for up to 30 days. Is that? Or at least 30 days? I think you have to look after it for at least 30 days. Uvagasa, and for a large animal, chamishim yom. You have to look after it for 50 days. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says differently, but dakash shlosha chadashim. Rabbi Yossi says you have to look after the animal for 3 months. Amar lo hakohen betoch zman ze tnehu li, harei ze lo yitnu lo. If a kohen says during this time, give the animal to me, the Mishnah says, harei ze lo yitnu lo, you should not give it to him. Im hayab balmum, if the animal was blemished, Amar lo, and the Kohen says to him, ten li she'ochlenu, and the Kohen says, well, give it to me so that I can eat it, then mutar. The Mishnah says it's permitted for you to be able to do that. Uvishas hamikdash, and at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, im hayat tamim, if the animal was unblemished, Amar lo ten li she'akrivenu, and the Kohen would say during these time frames, please give me the animal already, mutar, you'd be allowed to do so. Ha-bechor, I think this is a separate point now. Ha-bechor, with a firstborn animal, ne'echal shana b'shana, bein tamim, bein bal mum. The Mishnah says that the maximum time you can hold on to it is for a year. So the firstborn animal has to be eaten within its first year, whether it's blemished or whether it is unblemished. Shneimar, as it says in the verse in Devarim, chapter 15, Lifnei Hashem Elokecha tochlenu shana b'shana. You shall eat it before the Lord your God year by year, meaning that whatever the instance, the maximum time to be able to hold on to this Bechor is for up to a year. Okie dokie. Mishnah base. Nolad lo mum b'toch shnato. If the animal develops a blemish within its first year, mutar l'kaimo kol shnei masar chodesh, then it is permitted to look after this animal for a whole year. La'achar shnason, after that year, if it develops a blemish, eino rashai l'kaimo ela ad shloshim yom. So what we're saying, if a blemish developed after 12 months, it is permitted for the owner to maintain the animal for only 30 days. Why would you have it beyond a year if we've just said beforehand that you're only allowed up for a year? Good question, everyone. Because the year was during the Beis Hamikdash. My apologies. So during the time of the Beis Hamikdash, you were not allowed to hold on to it for over a year. But without the Beis Hamikdash, I guess, you can hold on to it for longer. But if a blemish appears after 12 months, then you're only allowed to hold on to that animal for another 30 days. I think that's what the Mishnah is saying. Beautiful. Mishnah Gimel. In order for a previously unblemished Bechor to be slaughtered outside the Beis Hamikdash, it must have a permanent blemish, which is to be assessed by an expert. We'll learn the blemishes later, just in case any of you are wondering what those are. But it has to be checked. It has to be checked by an expert. So what if you don't get it checked by an expert, and then you just kill it, and then you have it checked? So that's what Mishnah Gimel, hopefully, assuming my notes are correct, That's what Mishnah Gimel is going to be dealing with. Hashoichet habachor umara es mumo. You slaughter the animal and then you get the blemish checked out. So you're supposed to have it checked by an expert, and you've chosen to do this after the slaughtering. So the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda Matir, Rabbi Yehuda says, that's okay, as long as it's not a mum from the shechita, which the expert would be able to determine. Rabbi Yehuda says, all is good. Rabbi Meir says, Hoil v'hu nishchat shelo al pi mumche asur. Since it has not been given clearance by an expert to be slaughtered, so therefore we have to penalize him. He didn't ask permission. And so even if the mumcha, even if the expert says that the blemish came before the shechita, nonetheless we're going to penalize him, and it is going to be forbidden for him to have any benefit from this animal at all. Mishnah Daled. Mishnah Daled. If somebody was not an expert and he examined this Bechor and then he slaughtered it, or it got slaughtered on account of his psak, his halachic ruling, then it is not allowed to have any benefit from it. So if it was blemished, right, he declared that it was blemished, and then it gets killed, but he's not an expert. So the Mishnah says, that it has to be buried, there's no benefit, and the compensation to the Kohen, the compensation to the priest, has to be paid from the assets of the person who judged. So that is the halacha in such an instance. If the person was not an expert and he went and ruled inappropriately, so then the compensation has to come out of his own pocket. In a similar vein, we're going to talk about some other halachas that are similar to this. Says the Mishnah, Dan es hadin, if a non-proficient judge has ruled in a particular instance, Zika es hachayav v'chiyev es hazakai, and he has ruled favorably for someone who should have been liable, or he has obligated someone who was otherwise innocent. Timei es hatahor, is declared something which was pure, and he has declared it impure. V'tiher es hatamei, or he has declared something which should have been impure, and he has gone and erroneously declared it pure. Mashasa asuri v'shalam in beisos, so he has done what he has done, but the compensation has to come from his own pocket. But if he was, am I in the right place? None of this English translation on the screen looks accurate at all, so I'm guessing at some point it will be. If he was an expert judge and he made a mistake, so the Mishnah says patur milashalem, then he would be exempt from payment. Sometimes judges make mistakes, but we don't penalize a proper judge because sometimes they make mistakes and we don't want to discourage people from becoming judges. So only somebody who is not an expert judge and not rabbinically or judicially accredited, so their rulings will still stand, but they are going to have to pay out of pocket. But an expert judge, someone who is a proper dayan, they will not have to pay any compensation if they made a mistake in their ruling. There was an incident, here we go, now we're back on the English on the screen. There was an incident involving a cow whose womb was removed. And Rabbi Tarfon paskined that that what was taken out could be fed to the dogs. And the incident came before the Chachamim, who were sitting in Yavne, and they ruled that actually this animal was not treif, it was actually a permitted animal. And I think the implication here is that Rabbi Tarfon ruled incorrectly, and he ruled stringently that the animal was treif, and so he said it could be fed to the dogs. But actually, according to the Chachamim, it was actually a valid animal. Amar Todos Harofen, Todos the doctor, Theodosius, as it says on the screen, he came along and said, Ein para the chazira yotza. So I think this is also a separate thing now. This is just showing us that Rabbi Tarfon made a mistake and he wasn't penalized for it. Amar Todos Harofe came along, Todos Harofe, the doctor, and said, Ein para the chazira yotza me Alexandria. A cow or pig is not allowed to come out in Egypt, in Alexandria, until they have sterilized the mother. So in order that it can't give birth anymore. So I guess there was this ruling. What are we trying to say over here? So the cows and pigs in Alexandria were of such exceptional quality that they did not want them to be able to reproduce. So they gave hysterectomies to all of these animals. And Amar Rabbi Tarfon, on account of this, Rabbi Tarfon says, Halcha chamorcha tarfon. So Rabbi Tarfon said, in that case, your donkey is gone, meaning that he was penalizing himself, that he was going to have to pay for. Okay, so I'm really sorry if I'm messing this up a little bit, but because these animals in Alexandria were given these hysterectomies and would nonetheless live long lives, so they would not be considered treif. And he had said, if you recall, that he had ruled. Okay, now we understand. So Rabbi Tarfon had ruled stringently about a cow that had its womb removed, that it was given a hysterectomy, yeah, and he said that makes it treif, and because it's treif, it has to be given to the dogs. And the rabbis came along and said, no, actually this animal was permitted. And now we see that there was not a single cow in Alexandria that did not have a hysterectomy. And yet we see that those animals were not treif. Therefore, Rabbi Tarfon made a mistake. And if Rabbi Tarfon made a mistake, so he was an expert, he shouldn't have to pay. He shouldn't have to be penalized. But Amar Rabbi Tarfon says, Halcha chamorcha Tarfon. Sorry, mate, he says to himself, you are going to have to compensate for the fact that you have ruled erroneously on this cow. So he was strict on himself to be penalized, even though he didn't need to be. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said to him, Rabbi Tarfon, paturata, you're exempt. Shata mumche lebeisdin, you are an expert. You don't need to penalize yourself. And anyone who is an expert is exempt from payment. So he was willing to be strict on himself, and then Rabbi Akiva came along and said that he does not need to be strict on himself. Mishnah Hey, discussing halachas of the mumche, of the expert. Says the Mishnah, Hanotel sacharo liyos roya bechoros. If a person receives judgment or accepts payment for examining these animals, ein shochatin al piv, then we can't listen to him. You're not supposed to take payment for judging these blemishes, because he might just be saying it's blemished so that he gets paid. So you're not supposed to. So you can't therefore accept his verdict. Elohim Kain hayamumcha ke'ila v'yavne. Unless he was an expert like Ila in Yavne. Shitiru lo chachamim lihiyos notel abai saros b'mehim adaka. Because the chachamim allowed Ila, who was this huge expert, they permitted him to take a small wage of 4 isarot per small animal. Vashisha bagasan, to take 6 isarot for a large animal. Bein tamim, bein balmum. Whatever his suck, whatever his ruling would be, he had a flat rate which he was entitled to on account of being given permission by the Chachamim. But generally, one is not supposed to accept payment for this responsibility. Mishnah Vav, other people who are not supposed to collect wages or are not supposed to claim certain benefits, and what happens if they do take money? So the Mishnah says, Hanotel sacharo ladun. Right, a judge is not supposed to take wages, because it could be misconstrued as bribery. But if a judge was to take payment from both parties, nonetheless, dinav batelim, his testimonies, his rulings are going to be void, null and void. Leha'id, what if a person takes wages to testify? Edusav batelim, then his testimonies are going to be invalid. Lahazos lekadesh, what if a person takes wages to sprinkle the water of the para aduma, or to lekadesh, or to sanctify those waters? So the Mishnah says, Meimav meima'ara. We don't accept it. That water has the halachic status of cave water, which you can't use. The ephra mikle, and the ashes are considered to be just mere ashes from an oven, and not like ashes from a para aduma. Im haya chohen v'tim'ahu mitrumaso. If the person, so the Mishnah says, the screen says here, even though taking wages is prohibited, if the person examining the animal is a kohen, v'timahu mitrumaso, and the kohen renders the owner of the animal impure, what are we saying over here? What do I say? So I think what's going on over here is he causing a loss to someone who's seeking out your ruling. So im haya kohen, if the person who's ruling on this animal is a kohen, v'timahu mitrumaso, and oh goodness me, what are we saying? The one examining the firstborn, or the judge. Oh, I see. Okay, my mistake. So if in any of these instances, even though you can't take wages for any of these responsibilities, but if the one who's examining the animal, or the one who's a judge, or the one who is a witness, which we've just said you're not supposed to do while taking money, if they were a kohen, and the one who requires his services as a judge or as a witness or as an examiner rendered him impure, right? Made this kohen impure, mitrumaso, so he now can't have his turuma. So you've caused the loss to the kohen on account of this guy becoming impure. So now you have to compensate the kohen. You have to give him food, you have to give him drink, you have to give him oil for smearing, because this guy has lost out on account of you. And if he is an elderly person, so even though you can't pay wages, if you cause him loss, you have to fulfill his loss. Or if he's an elderly person, so he needs help getting from point A to point B, then markivo ala chamor, then you have to send him a limo, right? You have to pay for his Uber. Okay, you have to transport him by donkey. So if you require these services, and the person is a kohen, or the person is an elderly person, so even though we're not paying them per se, you have to still finance their ability to perform this responsibility. You have to compensate his loss. And says the Mishnah at the end, "V'nosen los charaka poel," and in any event, even though you're not taking wages specifically for these different responsibilities, the Mishnah says you would still pay them for the loss of earnings that they would have had if they were not doing this work for you. So if they have to stop their own work to be able to judge for you, to be able to testify for you, to be able to examine your animal, so then you do have to pay them for the loss of earnings. You're just not paying them for the job that they are doing. So that's interesting. Once we get through it, well, once we understand somewhat of what we're talking about. Right, continuing with Mishnah Zion. So it would seem that a kohen, that kohanim that were given a bechor, would actually want the animal to develop a mum after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, because that way it can be checked and that way it can be slaughtered, because otherwise you have to pay for the upkeep of this animal, which has to be left to graze in the field. So the Mishnah says, "Hechashad ala Bechoros." If you suspect that these people are up to no good, so you suspect perhaps that they are selling meat as if it was a blemished animal, but or they're killing this unblemished animal, but they're claiming it was blemished. So if we are suspicious, Mishnah says, "Ein lokchin mimenu basar tzvaim," then you wouldn't be allowed to buy deer meat. That's D-E-E-R, not D-E-A-R. So you wouldn't be able to buy anything from them, including deer meat, or you wouldn't even be allowed to buy hides that have not been tanned. So even though deer is not obligated in the mitzvah of Bechor, you wouldn't be allowed to buy it because it does look a bit like beef, and you might be lying about which species it is. So you might have this Bechor which is unblemished, and you've gone and you've slaughtered it and you're selling it now, and you're labeling it as deer meat. It's a bit like that horse meat scandal a few years ago in the supermarkets, right? So therefore, if you suspect that they are slaughtering innocent firstborns, you can't even buy deer meat from them, and you wouldn't be able to buy hide from them either, because the fact that he has not taken the time to process it and to tan it indicates that he's trying to make a fast buck, and he's trying to get rid of it as quickly as possible. So you have to be suspicious if it looks like they're selling this stuff off the back of a lorry and you don't know where it's come from. Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer says, you'd be allowed to buy hides of female animals because they're not subject to firstborns. You would not be allowed to buy bleached wool or v'tzoi, or dirty wool from him. But you would be allowed to buy spun wool, which has been processed, and you would be allowed to buy things that have been turned into clothing, presumably because if they've held on to it for that long, it's because they weren't worried about the origins of these animals. Mishnah Ches. So here we're talking about other dodgy dealings and other areas of commerce where you might be suspicious about people. So the Mishnah says, Hechashad ala shviyis. If you are suspicious about an individual who might be doing business with produce during Shemitah, right? You can harvest for your own use, but you can't do business with any of your harvest. So the Mishnah says, Ein lokchin mimenu pishtan. You're not allowed to buy flax from him because flax has the sanctity of Shavuos. And even though it's only edible food that should be subject to the sanctity of Shavuos, flax is nonetheless considered to be edible, so you can't buy it. Va'afilu serik, even if it has been combed, even if it's only a minor process that's been done to it, nonetheless, and that's interesting because in my notes here I've written combed flax is only a minor process, and on the screen here it says that it is a major process. So not sure what to do about that. Let me see what the commentaries say. Yeah, so it should be that it's a minor process, and so people are not going to be so fussy about it. But you can purchase spun thread, and you can purchase woven thread from such individuals. And I'm not sure why. Can't see in my notes why that would be. Mishnah Tes. Hechashad liyos mochet teruma l'shem chulin. So truma is a separation, is a portion that can only be eaten by kohanim. But people might lie, and they might say that it's profane, so that they could sell it to more people and charge higher prices. Because if there's more demand, then you can charge more. So hechashad liyos mochet teruma l'shem chulin. If you are suspicious that there's somebody selling teruma items under the name of profane, non-sacred items. Ein loikchin memenu afilu maim or melach, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you have to penalize these people because they are doing this all year round. It's not just once every 7 years on Shvius, on Shemitah. This could be a concern all year round. So therefore, we penalize them. You're not even allowed to buy water or salt. These are items that shouldn't even need to be tithed. But because you can't trust these people, so we have to penalize them. And we have to be very, very strict on them to discourage them from this practice. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon says that we don't penalize except for what is under suspicion. So kol sheyesh bo zikas terumos umasros. Only things which have any relevance to truma and ma'aser, ein lokchim memenu. You would not be allowed to buy from them. So as long as it's something that could be obligated in tithing, then those are the things that you would penalize the seller for, but anything else you can still buy from him. And finally, to finish off, chapter 4 for this evening, Mishnah Yud, talking about various things, some biblical, some rabbinic, that may or may not have a relation with each other. So just because we are suspicious of him for one biblical infraction doesn't mean that we would suspect him about everything. But if you are suspicious about a biblical thing, then you can be pretty sure that they're probably violating the rabbinic ones as well. So the Mishnah says, Hechashid ala Shvius, if you suspect that someone is violating the laws of Shvius, which are biblical, Eino chashud ala masrot. So then we don't have to be suspicious as well that they are violating the laws of Ma'aser, which are also biblical. But says the Mishnah, Hechashud ala Ma'aseros, if someone is suspicious about their Ma'aser activities, Eino chashud ala Shvius, then we also don't have to be suspicious that they are violating Shemitah as well, both biblical. Says the Mishnah, Hechashud al zeh v'al zeh, if you are suspicious that they are going to a bit dodgy in both of these areas, then the Mishnah says Chashud ala Taharos, then we are suspect that they are going to be dodgy with respect to Tumah and Tahara, which might be biblical in nature and rabbinic. So we would be suspicious about. V'yesh shehu chashud ala taharos, but there could be a situation where you are suspicious about their attitude to dealing with pure items and impure items. Ve'eno chashud lo al zeh v'lo al zeh, but we wouldn't be suspicious that they are violating these severe biblical transgressions of Shemitah and of Ma'aser. And says the Mishnah to finish off, Zeh haklal, kol hechashud ala davar, anyone who is suspect with regard to a specific matter, lo dano v'lo me'ido. He may neither adjudicate cases nor may he testify in cases, even if it's not relevant to him, even if there's no benefit to him. If he doesn't have these sensitivities, then we just can't trust them for different testimonies and different court cases and things like that. So the moral of the story is, guys, always be a trustworthy individual. And with that we say, Mazel Tov, ladies and gentlemen, on completing Perek Daled, on completing chapter 4. And that's all we've got time for this week. So join us next week on Mishnah Mastery. Please God, we will continue with chapters 5 and chapter 6, making our way through Maseches Bechorot, which is only 9 chapters long. So you never know what can happen. A couple of weeks' time, and we will be moving on from Maseches Bechorot into another one. It may only be 2 weeks' time because 7's quite short, 8 is quite long. Okay, we'll have to see. 2 to 3 weeks, guys. But that's all for tonight. I wish you all Laila Tov, a wonderful, meaningful evening, and we'll see you all.